I'm here today with Rick Levine. Rick is an old colleague of mine. Well, I'm going to say old. He's a colleague long-standing of mine.
I'm
We
kidding.
connect. We connected for the first time, I want to say, close to 20 years ago in tech
Yes.
career somewhere, and then our paths crossed in chocolate, and then our paths crossed again when Rick moved to Portland recently. So, hello, Rick.
Hey there.
Do you want to explain to the people who are going to be listening to this who may not know your background and who may not know about uh, what the reason for getting this call together is, which is a book you wrote and then updated called the Cluetrain Manifesto?
It's an interesting crossing of multiple things. So my background, I was brought up in artistic family. My father's a ceramist, was a ceramist. Um, I've been around artists all my life. I was the black sheep, went into technology and did lots of startups and eventually got to the point where I realized that if I wasn't doing something with my hands, there was part of my brain that wasn't being used. So I've done a bunch of companies, but the interesting one that brought us together was a chocolate company. It was the first company producing organic filled chocolates in the world. And also, as part of the tech thing, I was co-author of a book called the Cluetrain Manifesto. So it came out in 99, early 2000. And the premise was a pretty simple one that was kind of obvious, which was the internet was doing some interesting things to conversation. So it was making us possible to have a conversation ignoring geography. So I could have a conversation about a Toyota dealer and ask for, is this Toyota dealer giving me a fair price on something? And someone who wasn't standing in the room or in the same community as I was could give me an answer. So it enabled conversations over longer geography. And it enabled us to go researching and looking for people's experiences and opinions simply by searching for text. This is the beginning of search engines. Um, it let us look for information from other people, and despite the efforts of companies and corporate PR and anyone who wants to present a filtered view of themselves, it undermined those efforts because I could see people talking, hear people talking about things, despite the efforts of people who want to filter the world's perception of them. And that applies to businesses, that applies to the marketplace. And the premise behind Cluetrain is that the marketplace becomes a conversational space.
So, when you were starting up Seth Ellis, what lessons from the Cluetrain world did you consciously incorporate into what it is that you were doing into this new foray into chocolate?
Well, it's something that's followed me through multiple companies. And the premise is that you're actually building a customer service company. You're building a company where people talk about their product and the things they're doing to their customers. And that sense of knowing what you're talking about and being a docent or a guide for your customers through conversation is something that is central to the business. So not only was I making chocolates, making pralines, but I was talking to people about them. I was curating, in a sense, their experience, and that curation educated them and helped them make their own decisions about things. So instead of just saying, if someone says, what's your favorite? The answer is always going to be, well, that really doesn't matter, but why don't you try this and this and this and tell me what you taste? But
And
sure.
no, no. So the question becomes, fast forward. Here we are in 2019, and the conversational space in terms of the tools that we use seem to be, fairly narrowly defined. So some people use Twitter. There's some overlap with Facebook. Are we in Instagram or Snapchat? Back when you were starting up Seth Ellis, what were the tools that you found to be interesting and appropriate to use? Which do you think work well? Do you wish there were other things you could have used?
Hmm. Well, there's a problem with selling chocolate. which is it's really hard to get someone to try it unless they taste it. So we look at Twitter or Facebook, Instagram as sort of silos where people exchange conversations, pictures, whatever. But in reality, that's only a portion of our existence. We're always, we're speaking. We speak on the phone. We speak through this mediated communication. I speak to people on the street. I say hello to my neighbors. But there's this community I'm part of, some of which is mediated online, some of which is face to face, some of which is through, telephone and video devices and, Skype with my kids or whatever. But so Seth Ellis was 2006-ish. So I was there from 2006 or 7 for six or 7 years. And we were able to use Facebook. We were able to use the web. We blogged a bit. So we've almost come full circle where long form exposition, being able to write a blog entry about something, is actually coming back. Back then, blogs were on the way out. People want tiny snippets of information. To some extent, that's still true. I guess I'm jaded a bit because I always jump to, well, why don't you try this in person? So it's one thing, yes, I can say something on Twitter, I can say something in a Facebook post, but that's like looking through the world at a pinhole. So I'm outside the ballpark looking in through a hole in the fence. And that experience doesn't fill out, that experience doesn't become more of a person to me until I can actually piece together the different media and the different aspects of the conversation.
I think that some of the things I'm struggling with at times is that not everybody who creates a new chocolate company really thinks about serving customers. Often the motivation is I'm making chocolate for myself, and other people seem to like what it is that I make, and so I'm going to sell them what I like, and not necessarily listen to what they want.
That's the premise behind any business. So I am a curator. I have my tastes, and whether I want to admit it or not, I sell to the people who trust my taste to choose products, to create things. So if I'm a baker or I am selling women's clothing, I'm dating myself here, but if we went into Chico's, my wife goes into Chico's, went into Chico's, and when that store started, she was in there because the buyer, and there was a single buyer at the time, the single guiding intelligence was finding things that appealed to her taste. So when we started Seth Ellis, the premise was not we're making good chocolate or we're making the best chocolate. I can say we were the first creator of organic truffles, because at that time there was no organic supply chain. There were just some organic bars, and most of the chocolate tasted like crap. But it was the choice of products and ingredients that we made to match our tastes that our customers wanted. And the premise is that I can find enough people like me to buy my stuff to make a successful business. So anyone who thinks I am doing this for the world has their own blinders on. So I can tell you what my preferences are in chocolate, but that doesn't mean they're yours, almost certainly. It doesn't mean they're the next guy's, the next person, the next woman's, whatever it is. But the premise behind doing a business is I have something, I like it, and I'm going to inflict it on the rest of you. That's the chutzpah. That's the going in ante that all of us choose, even if we don't admit it, when we start a business.
Yeah, I suppose that when I think about this customer service issue, it's in this context of creating a conversation about what it is that I'm doing and why. So I create an outpost on the internet. I created a website. Maybe I have a Twitter account, maybe I have an Instagram account, maybe I have a Facebook account. And it seems like these siloed places are not necessarily really good vehicles for creating and carrying on conversations. And you know, if you were to go and join a brand new chocolate company operation next week, how would you approach this? How do I create conversations? Because, I have conversations not only with my customers, but I also have conversations with my supply chain. Right? It works in both directions, and I want to communicate about those in both directions. From the customer down to my supply chain partners, and from my supply chain partners back up to my customers.
And it's actually there's ambiguity about who's who. So, for instance, my machine supplier who sold us a depositor was also a fan of our chocolates and told their friends who are more knowledgeable in the business because they deal with the stuff,
Right.
our day-to-day stuff of production and manufacturing. And they become customers, and we get a call from a family member twice removed from one of them wanting to know about our chocolates. And I have no idea where this came from, but, oh, yeah, Jason is my uncle. And that was the path we followed. That I still think it comes down to customer service. If you, let's just an analog thing. If all I had, so I see kiosks in Portland, we saw them in Boulder, and the folks go around with the posters for bands or people performing in bars, and they staple these things up on kiosks, and there's a wave of them, and there's a fight trying to. Everyone puts their poster over the last people's posters, okay? And the poster police come through every once in a while and strip everything off, and they start again. What if you could only communicate your business by putting up a poster with a message on it? So all you could do every week was print a poster and put it on 100 kiosks in town. And that was the sole marketing and message passing ability you had. You may not last too long. That's, for the bands, if that was the only thing they did, they wouldn't be in business. If we just look at Instagram or Twitter or Facebook, all we're doing is putting messages, we're putting up posters on kiosks. The band also does performances. They actually make their money by selling CDs in bars and other places. So maybe I'm biased or cynical, but I treat each of these silos as another layer, another chip, another small piece of this communication puzzle. And I'm in all of them. I have to go to all these places. I have to use them. Some are more or less effective. So for a regional or a local chocolate manufacturer, I would argue that going to the farmer's market sells a lot more chocolate locally and gives you a chance to talk to people more than posting on Facebook or Twitter. And all of us start as manufacturers because we're selling something perishable. We start locally. And if our shelf life is long enough and we play the packaging and financing game, then we become regional and go out from there. And is this getting at?
Yeah, I think so. This is the first in what I hope will be a series of conversations on either a regular or irregular basis. We're getting to create a platform, and hopefully what happens is that I'll ask people to put comments down below, and so there's an opportunity to continue these conversations and respond to comments.
And there's an interesting tension. Because you can plot us on multiple axes, our preferences and skills and biases, both personally and professionally. But professionally, when it comes to chocolate, you're on the craft and artisan end of the spectrum. And I'm a commercial melter on the other end. So there's an interesting tension to explore there, because my bias is towards how do I manufacture things and make a business out of them. And I think there was a quote I caught from you at one point, which says that if you can make a second batch, which is the same as a first batch, then you become an industrial chocolate.
Well, I want to get to that point because it's part of the conversation we had earlier. Before we started recording, and then I want to jump into these 6 ideas that Spencer Hyman from Cocoa Runners in the UK had.
And you may want to reassemble this in some way too. So we're jumping around a bit, but
no, well, listen, people will listen in linear format. I think that one of the things that long form videos in places like YouTube have done, and audios, is they've trained people to get away from some aspects of the hyperlink and the short sound bites. And there is value in listening to things linearly rather than reassembling and jumping around and things like that. So I want to say, here's a start and here's an end, and we're going to play it from beginning to end. And the only thing I might take out is some very, very long pauses, or a fire siren that from the street that makes it impossible to communicate clearly. So in 2017, I was invited to speak both at the Salão de Cacau e Chocolate in Lima, as well as Chocolate Bahia in Brazil. And the title of the talk was The Future of Craft Chocolate. And I said that before we can have a conversation about the future of craft chocolate, we need to define what we mean when we say craft chocolate. Right? And at the time, my idea was you can think of craft and industrial as different sides of a coin. Right? You can be either craft or you can be industrial. Right? And I said that one of the I no longer believe this way. I see it more as a continuum, right? And not as binary as a coin. But I think that the distinction remains that if your primary concerns are consistency, right, because your customers demand it, so they require the same rheology, the same pH, the same flavor, then I would categorize you as an industrial producer. Right? If your concerns are not about repeatability, every batch can be different, for example, then probably you fit in the craft side of the can.
And as long as we accept that that's a spectrum,
yes,
I'm very comfortable with that,
right.
Because it could be that you have an industrial producer or chocolatier who also does a line of pralines where they never repeat themselves.
Absolutely. And thinking on this has evolved to the point where one of the ways you can see it, one of the ways you can now think about craft is that the hand of the producer is in every batch. Right? So somebody is tweaking and somebody is making distinction a la minute, as things are going. And that there is no less art in the making of industrial chocolate. It's just that the art, right, is at the beginning and it's used to set up how to program the machines to replicate it.
I think the scale spectrum, yes, I agree.
Yeah,
the scale spectrum is longer than one might think. So if you visit a Blommer or a Shokunog or, God forbid, one of the majors where they have a football field size space with nothing but conchas running, that's a different scale than a smaller producer. But to the extent it's going to be untrained help running numerical controllers, yes. I posit that even for very large-scale industrial folks, they don't use untrained help, and the people just don't run controllers, and there's a fair amount of judgment and intelligence, and maybe craft applied to make a product. That said, when I go to someone to buy chocolate for use downstream, if I cannot predict what the product is going to be like, maybe same, maybe different. But if the predictability varies in a way that obviates or gets in the way of my production, then I'm screwed.
Yeah, and so that's exactly the point that Spencer makes in his article about what craft chocolate can learn from other craft movements like craft beer. And one of the things that he says is that they need to have clear and accepted definitions, and the differences in the definitions are well explained. And my contention would be, as a movement, craft chocolate has not done a very good job of creating accepted definitions. and it's done a pretty horrible job of communicating about what those are. They have not done a good job of explaining them. So what does bean to bar mean? Can we differentiate bean to bar from somebody who's running a small 35 kilogram Melanger and Barry Calabout, who is arguably a bean to bar chocolate maker, right?
Well, they start with beans and somewhere they the bar.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So, and
It's even
part
worse
of my,
it's even worse than that.
how is it worse than, how could it possibly worse than that, Rick?
So what's, hang on a second, okay? We're taking a break so I can find the bar. Behind the screen right here is a table with 60 or 70 chocolate bars, most of them 80% or better, okay? So I'm doing research for a next gig here, and I'm trying to understand how the market's changed since the last time I touched it. Let me find a bar. Is it all right to mention names in this conversation?
Sure. No, absolutely. I mean, I name drop Barry Calabout.
Yeah,
and
but
you name Shokanog at the very beginning and others. Okay. So I mean, it's like, unless there is some, proprietary aspect of some research that's going on, I'm all for naming names.
And I would hope that people would try some of these things.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I'm in the process of writing the next edition of my book. And one of the points that I make in the book is that if you're going to be a good taster, you need to be Catholic in the original sense, which means universal,
yes.
In your interest in tasting. If you have not tasted something, you don't have a flavor reference for it. And everybody who is interested in thinking about flavor and talking about flavor should be omnivorous when it comes to chocolate. Right. I call myself an equal opportunity chocolate fan. I have to give every single chocolate I put in my mouth the opportunity to impress or disappoint. And I'm not going to judge something in advance because, oh, well, it's only 68% cocoa and therefore it's not really chocolate, or it's white chocolate and it's not really chocolate, or whatever. I mean, just put it, you have to put it in your mouth. You have to taste it.
You got to taste it.
And there should be it should be a zero judgment. Whoa. Okay. Oh, yeah, I know these guys out of Las Vegas.
Okay. These folks, this is pretty much, it's almost a pop-up from what I can tell. They're in Vegas. They are grinding. They've spent, I don't know, 50 to 70K worth of equipment. And I have no idea of their connection to growers. I have no idea how much homework, but there's a difference between someone who has very long-term relationships with growers and has established an end-to-end process, and someone who is just grinding and producing bars with much less geographic investment, personal investment, process investment. So
investment in understanding the supply chain.
Well, investment in participating in the supply chain. You cannot be a spectator. In other words, you change it by being there, and you have to understand how your presence changes it and what effects it has on all the actors. So the reason I bring up the Hex folks, the JRS guys, is this seems to me as an easy way to get into bean to bar by our normal definitions, but I don't know how to compare this to Alan McClure or Art Pollard, for instance, who I know have been working with farmers and have spent a lot of time in this space. They're both bean to bar, they're both craft chocolatiers. The definitions fail at this point because I no longer have vocabulary that lets me explore that spectrum.
And right, no, and again, just for the record, you were holding up a bar from a company in Las Vegas called Hex, H-E-X-X. It was a 70%, it was a Venezuelan, they call it a pure origin, and a dark chocolate. And you mentioned they were a pop-up. At some point, they did have a full-time store.
Oh, no,
or full-time or full-time retail presence, and I
no,
think
they
they've
do.
moved. Right, but I think
They're in Paris.
well, they may be in Paris, but in Las Vegas, at one point they had a full-time. You could walk in and see them making the chocolate,
I think.
and I believe that's no longer the case in Las Vegas.
Oh,
In the last year, it may.
okay.
I may be.
They're still advertising tours, but they're also running a restaurant.
Right. Okay. Well, I'm going to be there, and I'll be there in a couple of weeks, and I will go confirm
again,
it. Confirm it.
And my perception and my impressions are completely based on looking on the web and tasting their bars.
Right. Okay. But I think that the point here that I wanted to make and that you brought up as part of the conversation I had about the future of craft chocolate, and the one that Spencer brings up, is very, very much around this. At some point, the vocabulary is not enough, right, for even people who are really deeply versed in this to be able to understand what is going on without actually a much deeper dive. The words just don't help us really understand anymore.
We're groping for qualifiers, and it takes an extended explanation to pin down a concept. Yes, because we don't have a shorthand for it.
Okay. And that gets in the way of having productive conversations.
It just takes longer.
Well, I mean, to the extent that people might be confused with what goes on, right? Does the lack of vocabulary actually get in the way of having productive conversation? Or is it you just need to have somebody who's willing to sit there long enough to listen to you explain it?
Well, this conversation, for instance, we're pretty much gluttons for punishment. So we'll listen to each other and keep going back and rehashing things until we think the other person gets the point, right? So we're pretty forgiving in that sense. If I go to someone's customer, so there's a store called Cacao in downtown Portland.
Yeah, Aubrey and Lindley. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and they do a really nice job. It's a well-curated store. They have some great chocolate there. But for someone coming into that store for the first time and saying, where do I start? There's probably a set of handles or knobs you give them saying, try one of these, try one of these, try one of these, and here's how you taste chocolate. So they're really not interested in this distinction we're making yet. They might be. That Max, again, I got chocolate from Soma and from Cloud Forest. This Hex bar, I bought at QFC for $5.29. That's the local Kroger.
Okay.
So there's a difference in marketing and distribution chain there that I have no clue how this bar got into Kroger, given that these guys can maybe grind 50 or 60 kilos at a time.
Right.
So, but to your point,
they do exhibit at the fancy food show. I've seen them exhibit at fancy food shows. So at some point they made a connection to some buyer somewhere.
They paid $1,500 for a booth. Yes.
Yeah.
But to your point, our need for vocabulary and ways to talk about this far outstrips someone who goes into Cacao or goes into Fog City in San Francisco and says, I know this is a place for good chocolate. What do I do next? And so you're going to equip them with some vocabulary and start giving them a yardstick to help measure their own experiences. But I don't know that some of the distinctions that fascinate us, they're going to care about. Maybe that's wrong of me to make that assumption.
No, I don't think it's wrong of you to make the assumption. I think my own experience tells me that everyone who walks into the situation will have their own level of interest and their own awareness and understanding. And the best way to be able to serve them is to go to them rather than asking them to come to you.
Agreed.
Right? So you need to know what's your level of interest. What do you like? What do you don't like? All these things, and then you can say, "Oh, I can." You start a conversation.
Yes.
All right. So I think we've covered a lot of stuff that people are going to have to look at and think about. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask you to think about this notion of, what are the knobs and dials and the tools in the conversation, right? Or the knobs and dials and the vocabulary that you might want to construct to engage with people sort of first in this retail environment. Somebody walks into a store, they don't know what you have, so there's a point of entry problem, there's a discoverability problem, right? And that exists on both times. I, as someone who's providing the customer service, right, needs to go to them to figure out what it is that they're looking for. And so to the extent that there are responses to this, right, what I'd ask people to do is ask questions or to provide their own kinds of responses. These are things that have worked for me. These things have failed for me, right? What have we found to be effective? This may be a little challenging for you because you worked on the wholesale end of it and not spend most of your career in chocolate working in a retail environment. But I get the sense from the history you have in thinking about conversations in the Cluetrain context that you have some very, very strong ideas about what that looks like.
About the retail conversation.
Yeah, knobs and dials and
Sure.
How people might, yeah.
And it's actually most of it's around retail, because at the end of the day, someone who is tasting my chocolates doesn't really care about all the other stuff. In other words, all of my struggles, all of my technical stuff, all that's all baggage to them. They don't care how it got into their hand and how that affects what it tastes like. They just say, oh, I like this one, or I don't like that one, or what's the difference? How do I pick? But at some point, it's not the manufacturing piece of it. You can talk about, well, cacao is grown, not made. It doesn't grow around here. It's grown by farmers. Their beans, up until fairly recently in the history of the world, were taken away from them and brought to Northern Europe, and things were done. And most of them didn't know actually what was done to them.
Yep.
But it's a manufacturing process where you have to get this agricultural product. It has to be treated the right way. It can be done locally, but most of the time it doesn't get done locally, our own North American manufacturers. And some of the decisions you make change the taste. And then you're going to understand first, how do you read the label on the back of the box so you know what you're getting? And there's milk and dark. And you start laying out, I have 4 things that you can taste. Start there. And decide what you like and what you don't like. This one's going to be dark. This one's going to be milky. This is sort of in the middle. And they're going to ask questions. What's milk chocolate? Or does dark chocolate taste better, worse, bitter, whatever? At some point you unwrap well, at the end of the day, this is candy. Bias showing there, forgive me. But it's a combination of brown stuff and fat and sugar. And if you subtract everything out and you look at the percentage of sugar, that's what's determining that number that we've written on the box for you. And we'll taste the difference.
Right. So I think that we've set a really good playing field for what we might do in the next call. But one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is, you said you have 60 to 70 boxes of chocolate on the other side of your monitor. You select, 2 that you think start this conversation in a very good way and move it along from whatever it is that's in the packaging, and a couple that you think could do better, for want of a better term. And we can discuss, what that means, right? Because for me,
actually, how about this for a starting point? We each pick a couple. All right. Okay. I don't know if we tell each other what they are, so we can. No.
I think it would be. I mean, the likelihood of you and I having the same bar of chocolate is pretty small, right? And if we do, accidentally happen to pick the same bar, that would be revealing.
Oh,
So I'm
picking one out of a collection or one out of what's available, the odds of that are pretty damn slim if I do it randomly.
Yeah, right. It's whatever. I mean, I have whatever you have is whatever you have, and whatever I have is whatever I have.
But it's a pretty wide range. I mean, I'm holding a bar from Chihuahua, okay, called Sprinkle Dreams, with crisp waffle cone, hazelnuts, and rainbow sprinkles party in milk chocolate in my hand. Okay, the odds of you're picking that bar up
are pretty much zero.
Yeah. Okay. But
what we're trying to do is, again, we're not engaging in a conversation about whether or not we like the chocolate inside or whether that chocolate appeals to us, but whether or not the messages that are on the labeling, right, do a good job of starting conversations.
And where that particular instance fits in the universe of these.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's an amazing range. And again, I picked, the reason that bar is in this collection is because my jaw dropped when I saw it. And I said, they're selling what? This is sort of marketing gone amok in some ways.
Okay.
But again, there are.
Now, and I want you to know, because Michael Antonorsi, when he was starting up the company, sent me samples from his first production runs. And I can tell you that where he is now, from where he started back in 2002 or 2003, right, it's just, wow. It's remarkable.
Yeah.
Right, where he is now compared with where he started. Right? But those are all really interesting because, the trajectory of the business, how do we create a profitable business? Right? It's a part of this. Right.
And I'm assuming that's an intent, profitable business, right?
I'm hoping so.
Well,
I mean, and I think for craft, I think that for craft chocolate makers, who many of them say one of the reasons why I'm in business is because I want to help farmers. If they're not sustainable businesses, they can't keep their promises to their farmers.
Well, they can't even keep their promises to themselves. Before I can help someone else, I have to have a place to stand.
Right.
Roof over my head.
So yes, we can start from the assumption that everybody wants to have a sustainable business, right? And we can go into. I'm trained as a fine artist. I was a photographer, Rhode Island School of Design, and there are people I know as artists, and there are people I know in the chocolate business who believe that any compromise of their artistic integrity is complete failure on their part, and they will remain starving artists for the rest of their lives because they're unwilling to compromise, right? Whereas some people understand, well, it's okay to make a bar from West African cocoa because people like chocolate flavor, and we're going to go with chocolate flavor because people like it, right? And they turn out often to be the best-selling bars in the collection.
Which has nothing to do with the intent going in, but does say a lot about what people's preferences are in our culture or in a given culture.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Cool. So very cool. I mean, Rick, again, we've connected off and on, had very, very, narrow bandwidth, short-term correspondences. I mean, I reconnected you after the chocolate business in a sock business that you and your brother got into, Zoab. And, they are still among some of the favorite socks that I own, not just from a comfort perspective, but also from just the colorways. I mean, they're just, if anybody, XOAB, if anybody has never seen Zoab socks, Rick is in large part responsible for what they're doing these days. They're just really, really quite phenomenal. But we really haven't had a chance to, come out the other side and then, look at the trajectories of our careers and see where we are now. And so I'm really, really happy to have this the opportunity to start these conversations with you. Is there anything you'd like to close with? Because I think we've got a lot to think about for the next conversation.
I'm enjoying this, and it's an opportunity to have a little bit more depth. So not to have just a very short window when we are both in the same city at the same time, which has pretty much been either that or emails and a lot of our interaction. But I'm enjoying this because we're both at the point in our careers where we have a fair amount of context in history, and we've been self-reflexive, or we're starting to understand what our biases are and where we're coming from, and being able to compare and contrast and mix and match those about a subject that we both love, I think is a lot of fun.
Yeah, and if you're not having fun in chocolate, you are definitely doing it wrong.
Oh,
So
I
I'm
hope.
looking forward to have. So I'm very, very definitely looking forward to having more fun conversations on these topics in the coming weeks and months. All right, and from Portland, Oregon, and from Larchmont, New York, we thank everybody who's listening to this, and hope that everybody will take a moment to respond, share your thoughts, and give us some things that we can use in the next conversation.